The National Desk, America's News, now.
From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Dee Gatton. Thanks for joining us. On this Weekend Edition, we take a look at the big headlines of the week, and we look ahead at what to expect, starting with the 4 big stories we've been following this week. Mortgage rates drop again, but job numbers get a dismal revised reading. How Americans are really feeling about their economic future. As summer comes to an end, students are getting back to school. How an uptick in COVID cases could play a role. Plus, how some colleges are cracking down on protests on campus. But first, the race to the finish. Presidential candidates crafting agendas to win over crucial voters. The policy proposals getting the most attention. Vice President Kamala Harris formally accepted the Democratic nomination for president in the convention's finale on Thursday night. Harris emphasized her upbringing in a middle-class family while also leaning into her time as a prosecutor. She also laid out what a Harris-Walz presidency would look like, with promises to fight for fundamental rights and grow the economy.
As president, I will bring together labor and workers and small business owners and entrepreneurs and American companies to create jobs, to grow our economy, and to lower the cost of everyday needs like health care and housing and groceries.
Harris also touched on other hot-button issues, including the war in Gaza. And independent candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. ended his campaign Friday, endorsing Republican candidate Donald Trump. After losing traction with voters after polling around 5%, Kennedy reportedly ran out of campaign funds. It's unclear right now what role, if any, he could play in a potential Trump White House. This week, former President Trump also held his first outdoor rally since he survived an assassination attempt last month. His podium was surrounded by bulletproof glass to protect him as he spoke to voters in North Carolina. Storage containers were stacked around the perimeter of the rally to block sight lines. At the rally, Trump went on the attack against former President Barack Obama after his speech at the DNC. Obama blasted Trump during his speech, calling him a whining billionaire, among other insults. Trump said if Democrats are going to take shots at him, he should respond in kind.
Here's a 78-year-old billionaire who has not stopped whining about his problems since he rode down his golden escalator 9 years ago.
They always say, sure, please stick to policy, don't get personal. And yet they're getting personal all night long, these people.
At one point, Trump polled the crowd on if he should stick to policy or get personal. The crowd agreed Trump should get personal. As Harris gradually unveils her policy proposals, a few are standing out as she's flip-flopped on major issues and is using her agenda to target voters in battleground states. The National Desk, Janae Bowens, has a look at the swing state strategy.
The 2024 presidential election will come down to the battleground states. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump are both honing their messages to get the slightest edge with these highly coveted voters.
Key issues getting attention are fracking because of the swing state of Pennsylvania. Of course, the border, many Americans care about that, but especially Arizonans. And no tax on tips. That's to appeal to voters in Nevada.
On day one, I will tell the frackers and energy workers of Pennsylvania to drill, baby, drill.
Now, Harris has flip-flopped on the issue. This is what she said at a town hall back in 2019 during her first run for president.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking.
Her campaign says she will not seek a fracking ban if elected.
Kamala Harris supports investing in new technology to block fentanyl from entering the country. Donald Trump blocked funding for technology to block fentanyl from entering the country.
Harris is getting tougher on border issues, but her critics aren't buying it.
The fentanyl crisis really took off under the leadership of Kamala Harris, under the border czar policies where she opened up the southern border.
And the vice president is accused of copying Trump's tip proposal to appeal to Nevadans.
Eliminate taxes on tips for service and hospitality workers.
We're not going to tax tips. All of a sudden, she comes out and she says the same thing, exactly the same words that I used months later.
In all three of these battleground states, polls showed Trump and Harris neck and neck, where a swing of a tiny percentage of voters could determine who wins or loses on Election Day. In Washington, I'm Janae Bowens reporting for the National Desk.
A New York appeals court is set to hear oral arguments on Donald Trump's $454 million civil judgment next month. Trump has asked the First Department Appellate Division to throw out Judge Arthur Engoron's order. Engoron found Trump liable for fraud and ordered him to pay $354 million plus $100 million in interest. Trump is arguing the case never should have been brought because the conduct is too old. A decision in this case is unlikely to be issued by Election Day. The Supreme Court's emergency caseload has surged. The controversial emergency docket, or shadow docket to critics, has cases with decisions looming on student loans, elections, abortion, and climate. The docket is where the justices deal with questions that need resolution faster than the months it can take on the regular docket. That includes the High Court, set to tackle challenges to President Biden's latest effort to reduce student debt. Developing now, the Federal Reserve appears to be on track for its first interest rate cut since 2020. The central bank's July meeting minutes show a vast majority of members are optimistic for a September cut, given recent unemployment numbers and the progress on inflation. It's unclear how much of a cut the Fed is considering. Rates have remained in the 5.25 to 5.50% range since July of last year. Also new this week, the average rate on a 30-year mortgage dipped to its lowest level in 15 months. According to Freddie Mac, the rate eased to 6.46%, down from 6.49% last week. The finance company's chief economist notes rates have held steady after plunging earlier this month. He says it hasn't been enough to prompt a jump in home purchases, and rates will likely need to decline another percentage point to generate buyer demand. Dozens of students arrested during pro-Palestinian protests at Columbia University last spring will return to campus this fall. A congressional committee report said the school is allowing most of them to enroll in classes while they await disciplinary hearings. Charges against the students have been dropped and just a few remain suspended. The university says it's committed to fighting anti-Semitism. And the dangerous rise of hatred against Jewish people is forcing the world to act. The National Desk, Angelo Brown, explains what's being done.
U.S. officials are calling this a landmark event. New global guidelines for countering anti-Semitism adopted by nearly 40 states or governing bodies, including the U.S. The reason?
We're not only seeing records being smashed on anti-Jewish hate crimes here in the United States, we're seeing it around the world.
Here are the guidelines right here. Only 12, around 700 words. We are hearing from Ambassador Deborah Lipstand, the special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, calling the guidelines on X best practice to reduce Jew hatred.
The first one is leaders should speak out wherever and whenever they see an anti-Semitic.
Why is that so important?
Because too often you get them sort of, this is not a very frou-frouing around, I call it.
These new guidelines are coming roughly 10 months after the Hamas terror attack on Israel. And as America grapples with anti-Semitism on college campuses. We will not stop, we will not run. This month, Columbia University's president resigned. And a federal judge ruled UCLA failed to protect Jewish students by allowing them to be barred from parts of campus during protests.
When Jewish students are denied entry into parts of campuses, when synagogues are firebombed, when the statue of Anne Frank is desecrated with Free Gaza, when people chant globalize the Intifada, that is anti-Semitism, pure and simple.
Global guidelines, not enough. Brian Levin from the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism lays out what the next administration needs to do right here at home.
Hotlines at the state level that the federal government helps fund. Conciliation efforts, education efforts around the Holocaust and anti-Semitism are all important.
These guidelines are legally non-binding. They include policies to monitor and combat anti-Semitism that can be implemented to a wide variety of national, regional, and cultural contexts, according to the U.S. State Department. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
As the school year begins, districts across the country are still grappling with a severe teacher shortage. Emma from the Fact Check team joining us now. First of all, how many vacancies are we talking about?
Quite a bit. So the Annenberg Institute at Brown University found there were an estimated 55,000 vacant full-time teaching positions in the U.S. The research found the numbers definitely vary state by state and were actually already a problem in schools before the pandemic, especially among English learners, children of color, and then children with disabilities.
And making this even more severe is the fact that, some schools have already started and they're dealing with this problem right now. Which states have been hit the hardest with these shortages?
So it looks like Florida has definitely been hit the hardest. They have the highest demand for teachers with 5,200 open positions. North Carolina's next in line. They've got 3,619. And then Utah actually has the lowest number of open positions with only 37.
And some of the reasons that we've been hearing about for these teacher shortages, we've actually been hearing about for years.
Yeah, the main things that education experts say is bad working conditions and low teacher salaries. So that's what they're saying is causing this shortage.
All right, Emma, thank you. And later on, Emma will be back to dive into the topic of teacher pay and the difference it makes in filling these positions. As this school year gets underway, the CDC has now changed the guidance for COVID-19. People should treat the virus like any other respiratory illness, like the flu. Students can return to school 24 hours after a fever is gone, and it's okay to send students to school with a runny nose, cough, or headache. Extra precautions are advised, including masking and hand washing. Just as the nation sees a surge in COVID cases, the FDA has approved new vaccines from Pfizer and Moderna. Both drug makers say their updated shots will be available in clinics and pharmacies within the next few days. The approval comes as the CDC says there's been a summer wave of the virus, although infection rates are below the levels seen over the past few years. Coming up on the National Desk, America's News. Now, more Americans are becoming concerned about keeping their jobs. What experts are saying is the leading reason why. Plus, we're tracking new reports the Biden administration could expedite migrant crossings in Canada. How the change could impact northern border states. Since the start of the fiscal year in July, New York City has spent $112 million on the migrant crisis. Joining Jan Jeffco to discuss is former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Protection and visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Mark Morgan.
Let's talk about this huge cost that's really taken on the Big Apple, where taxpayers now have to share the burden of these tens of thousands of migrants who have been staying in city hotels. This is enormous.
Jan, good morning. It is enormous, but it goes well beyond funding for shelter, well beyond New York. This is U.S. taxpayers across this country are having to foot the bill for the Biden-Harris open border policies. In the last 3.5 years, we've seen millions of illegal aliens be allowed into this country, and taxpayers are paying for all of it, for housing, for clothing, for free medical attention, free health care. Jan, the list goes on and on. The Federation for American Immigration Reform did a study and said year over year, illegal immigration cost taxpayers about $180 billion. Chairman Mark Green of the House Homeland Security Committee, during his inquiry impeachment process against the disgraced Secretary Mayorkas of Homeland Security, said the first 3 years of this administration has cost taxpayers about $500 billion. So as taxpayers are finding it hard to find the money for rent, for groceries, and their own health care for their family, they're paying all of that for illegal aliens. Why? Because this administration has turned their back on the Constitution, the rule of law and common sense, Jan.
And it also comes as these new internal documents from the Department of Homeland Security, again from CBS News, showing the administration wants to expedite the process of migrants crossing from Canada into the United States. Obviously, New York, they're very much affected because of this unprecedented increase. What are these changes, Mark?
Well, they're really not changes, Jan. They're a continuation of what we call a safe third country agreement. I think we signed that with Canada in 2002. And it's exactly what we should be doing. It should be the international standard. What that means is if you're a valid asylum seeker and you transit through a country that can give you relief, that's the country that should give you that opportunity, in this case, Canada. So if someone transits through Canada and they claim asylum, they should not be allowed into New York. They should be returned to Canada. And the irony here is, first of all, it does a couple of things, right? One is that it gives relief to someone immediately, which is very important. Second, it ends forum shopping, meaning that the illegal alien should not choose where they get to go. And last, it reduces the cartel's ability to exploit them further on their journey. The irony here is this is exactly what we did in the Trump administration with all three Northern Triangle countries. On day one, the Biden-Harris administration ended the safe third country agreements we had with all three Northern Triangle countries. And what's really frustrating here is, look, so this is great we're doing with Canada, but the epicenter, 95% of the crisis is on the southern border. So we should be reinstating the safe third country agreements we had with all three Northern Triangle countries.
We're doing it with Canada. Why not also with Mexico?
Exactly.
The NYPD says a wolf pack of illegal teens right now targeting victims in Central Park. Now, this is something that we've actually seen pop up across the country. How alarming is this, Mark?
It's alarming. And Jan, you and I, and I've appreciated it, you allowed me to talk about this for the past 3.5 years. This is not shocking. This is a direct result of the open border policies. You cannot allow 10 million total nationwide encounters and 2 million gotaways in 3.5 years from 180 different countries. Many countries, we have no diplomatic relationships. We have little or no ability to vet them to understand what their criminal background is from their home country or whether they pose a reasonable national security threat and think it's not going to impact crime across this country. Right now, we've talked about it, we're seeing TDA, the Venezuela gang, start to spread out through the entire United States. We're literally seeing MS-13 2.0 emerge in living color, and we're doing nothing about it. How many more Laken Rileys and Rachel Morin, young, beautiful women that were savagely raped and murdered by an illegal alien that we encountered and still released into this country? Jan, and one last stat, just so people say, oh, well, this is just a one-off. In the first 3 years of this administration, ICE arrested 163,000 criminal illegal aliens, of which 4,700 were murderers and over 8,000 were gang members. You cannot talk about crime in this country without talking about our border.
Yeah, former acting commissioner of Customs and Border Protection and visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation, Mark Morgan. Always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. Thanks for joining us here on the National Desk.
You bet.
U.S. job growth during much of the past year was a lot weaker than initially estimated. Data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics suggests there were 818,000 fewer jobs in March of this year than were initially reported. It's the largest downward revision since 2009 and shows the labor market wasn't quite as red hot as it initially appeared. However, job growth was still strong. And more Americans are becoming worried that they'll lose their job. That's according to a new survey just released by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The National Desk, Jeff Harris, explains why fears continue to grow.
Part of the reason is unemployment increasing to 4.3% in July, which equates to 7.2 million people. But experts I talked with say, aside from unemployment, there could be a few other reasons Americans may be worried.
According to that survey by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, fear over becoming unemployed increased to 4.4%. A statistic David Sikora, a management professor, tells us could be because of inflation.
If something does happen to their job, are they going to have the necessary funds available to take care of themselves and their families?
But not just inflation. Sikora says resizing could also be a factor.
They either are in an industry that perhaps is undergoing some job cutbacks or job losses now, or they know people perhaps who are in companies that are going through some sort of job losses.
However, Tom Smith, a finance professor at Emory University, believes there isn't a lot of evidence that Americans should be worried.
The unemployment rate is still incredibly low. And when I talk to people in industry, people who are in human resources, they're doing a lot of recruiting at this point.
Plus, Smith says if you take a step back and truly understand your value at the company, you'll know whether or not there's a reason to be concerned.
I suspect that once you understand how productive you are or aren't, you can reset your expectations about keeping your job or losing your job.
Now, in that same survey, Americans also reported feeling that there are still opportunities out there, and the average expected likelihood of receiving at least one job offer increased from last year. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
Just ahead, public safety crisis. The city left scrambling after its entire police force quit this week for good. Plus, bear break-in, the quick thinking actions by a father that saved his kids' lives after he found a bear lurking inside their home. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in Maine, where a community is on edge after their entire police force quit, leaving them with no local protection.
Come Tuesday, Mexico will no longer have a police department to protect and serve its 2,700 residents.
There's a high crime rate in this Oxford County. I mean, it's not just Mexico. The citizens are concerned, and I don't blame them.
Former Sheriff James Terrio says Mexico police have been short-staffed for a year and a half. It came to a head when 3 officers decided to quit.
And so the other 3 have been working tons and tons of overtime, and they finally got fed up. They have families.
Terrio is now Mexico's new police administrator of records. He's now been charged with hiring 4 new officers and a police chief.
It is very difficult, and the town has given me a year to do this and hopefully to bring the department back. I think we'll be able to come out of this okay.
In Ohio, hundreds of thousands of residents' personal information is now on the dark web after the city of Columbus fell victim to a ransomware attack. After the city's mayor attempted to downplay the attack, residents are voicing concern over their personal data sitting on the web for anyone to use.
They have information that they know is of importance to people. They know directly relates to their own sense of safety and security, and they will find ways to exploit that.
The city says they will offer free credit monitoring and identity theft services for 2 years. In Oakhurst, California, a father was forced to confront a bear to save himself and his 2 babies. In the middle of the night, Christopher Smith was woken up by the sounds of a break-in. When he walked into the hallway and saw a bear standing there, he knew he only had a few moments to react.
After the fear, I thought, 2 babies, 4 dogs, how am I doing this? That was my last cognitive thought, was how am I doing this? I remember that very vividly.
And Christopher was able to get both his family and dogs to safety. Thankfully, California Fish and Wildlife says the bear was never caught. Coming up, end of summer celebrations may be the busiest in years. The surge in bookings and where more Americans are headed this Labor Day. U.S. officials say they are referring fewer unruly airline passengers to the FBI for possible prosecution. The FAA announced that it referred 43 reports to the DOJ for investigation this year, bringing the total to more than 310 since 2021. Passenger misbehavior has dropped by more than 80% since early 2021, according to the federal agency. As we inch closer to the end of summer celebrations, AAA reporting domestic travel bookings for Labor Day are already up 9% compared to last year. So far, Seattle is this year's top Labor Day weekend destination. Other popular places on AAA's list include New York, Boston, Denver, Anchorage, and Orlando. If you're traveling by car, some good news. Gas prices are about 30 cents less expensive than last year. Still summer, but a blaring signal of the fall arrived this week. The pumpkin spice latte is back at Starbucks in the U.S. Starbucks celebrated the drink's 20th anniversary last year. Roughly 10% of Starbucks' overall sales come from seasonal staples, according to the chain. Starbucks' new CEO, who is hailed as a corporate fix-it man from his work at Chipotle, starts next month. Ahead in our next half hour, dangerous forever chemicals used in certain sports, how they could be impacting athletes from kids to professionals, and back to school shopping strain, how Americans are paying in the best ways to save. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time, and anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We'll be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
Elevated threat environment, the dangers the FBI director says America is facing and how the Bureau is responding. Plus, a new phase in the war in Ukraine as the country pushes back against Russia's invasion. The new aid package the U.S. is now pledging. And later,
they can feel the negativity. They can feel the negative energy.
Social media taking a toll. Gen Z blaming popular platforms for their mental health decline. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Dee Gatton, and right now the director of the FBI says America is facing many elevated threats from different parts of the world all at once. The National Desk, Jeff Harris, has more on the urgent message.
One expert I spoke with says if the director of the FBI is saying this, these must be serious threats. As for what they are, terrorism, espionage, and also intellectual property theft are all possibilities.
Michael Wallace, a professor at Tulane University and retired military, tells us the comments made by FBI Director Christopher Wray are pretty unique.
You do not usually see FBI directors come out and say, we're in a very dangerous time.
In an exclusive interview with the Associated Press, Wray said in part, quote, that he is hard-pressed to think of a time in my career where so many different kinds of threats are elevated at once.
The fact that he did come out and say that is kind of a warning to everyone to take this seriously.
The remarks by Wray come as the FBI tackles heightened concerns over terrorism, Chinese espionage, intellectual property theft, and foreign election interference, along with state-based threats.
There could be an attack by a nation state against the United States. Again, targeting critical infrastructure.
Rowan Sharma, a faculty member at George Washington University, says there's also some concern over ransomware and cybersecurity attacks.
It's still affecting kind of our way of life, impacting schools, hospitals, emergency services.
A long list, but Sharma believes at the end of the day, the American people need to trust the local, state, and federal agencies working to protect the U.S.
They're trying to look at Russian election interference or Chinese malign activity and trying to provide solutions.
Now, Wray didn't talk about any specific investigation or threat, but he did mention that cyber attacks, including those targeting the election, require help from the private sector. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
The Biden administration will send $125 million in new military aid to Ukraine. The president says it will include air defense missiles, anti-armor missiles, and counter-drone equipment. This latest package comes as Ukrainian forces push further into Russia's Kursk region. The funding comes as Ukraine takes a step towards prosecuting Russian officials for war crimes. The country ratified the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. The statute is the ICC's founding treaty. It lets the court make legal rulings on a few offenses like war crimes. The ICC already wants arrest warrants out for Russian President Vladimir Putin and some military leaders, but Russia does not recognize the court's jurisdiction. New information: Senator Bob Menendez's resignation is now in effect. Menendez was convicted on 16 federal counts for using his power in office to help 3 businessmen and the Egyptian government in exchange for money and gold bars. The 70-year-old denies the accusations and says he plans to appeal the conviction. New Jersey's governor says he plans to appoint his former chief of staff, George Helmy, to finish Menendez's term, which ends in January. He is currently an executive at a healthcare provider in New Jersey. Governor Murphy says once election results are certified, he'll appoint the person who wins the seat. Former U.S. Representative George Santos pleading guilty this week to committing wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. The New York Republican was accused of defrauding donors and misusing money from his campaign for personal expenses. He reached a plea deal with prosecutors, saying in court he deeply regrets his actions. Santos is scheduled to be sentenced on February 7th. He is expected to serve a minimum of 2 years in prison and forfeit the money he made illegally. Santos was expelled from Congress due to the federal fraud case. Right now, the majority of Gen Z voters have little trust in Congress or the presidency. That's according to the results of a Gallup Walton Family Foundation survey. The poll surveyed nearly 4,200 people between the age of 12 and 27 years old. Among those of voting age, 53% said they trusted Congress very little. 51% said the same about the presidency and 44% about the Supreme Court. Gen Z is also developing strong opinions on social media. A new report shows young adults are concerned about the negative impact of these apps, particularly when it comes to mental health. The National Desk, Angelo Brown, breaks down the new findings.
So how much time do teens spend on social media? Nearly 5 hours, according to a report from the American Psychological Association.
On an average, the Gen Zers are spending almost 5 hours a day on social media. And here's the kicker. They report that after like 35, 40 minutes, they can feel the negativity. They can feel the negative energy.
And many believe their time scrolling is impacting their mental health. A new study conducted by Tarker Research found 3 in 4 Gen Zers blame social media for their mental health decline. The Surgeon General is calling for health warnings on social media for younger users.
We're in the middle of a youth mental health crisis in America. I've said before that this is the defining public health challenge of our time. And I'm very concerned that social media has become an important contributor to the pain and the struggles that many of our young people are facing.
This report from the American Psychological Association found that 41% of teens with the highest social media use rate their overall mental health as poor or very poor. Dr. Lee Richardson, the founder of the Brain Performance Center.
I think that social media has turned us into a comparative society. And anytime you compare, you have a winner and you have a loser.
But it's not all negative news. The same Tarker Research survey found while many associate platforms with negative emotions, 80% claim they also associate social media with a positive impact on their mood. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
New details. A federal judge in Texas has blocked a Federal Trade Commission rule that would have banned non-compete agreements. U.S. District Judge Ada Brown said the FTC overstepped its authority in making the rule. Non-compete agreements typically prevent workers from joining a competitor for a certain period of time after they leave a company. The decision means the FTC won't be able to enforce the rule, which was set to go into effect September 4th. A spokesperson for the FTC says the agency is considering appealing the court's decision. Back to school shopping is now busting budgets for families coast to coast. In fact, nearly 1 in 4 shoppers are taking on credit card debt, according to Bankrate. That includes 24% of people who are using or plan to use credit cards and paying the balance over time. and 13% who plan to use buy now, pay later services. Nearly half of shoppers are finding ways to save money, like looking for deals or coupons, buying cheaper brands, or purchasing fewer supplies than before. New research found there are around 55,000 teacher vacancies across the country as the nationwide teacher shortage rages on. Emma from the Fact Check team joining us now. Florida has been hit the hardest when it comes to open teacher positions. Why does this state stand out?
Yeah, so education experts say that it's a combination of some national trends here and then some issues particular to the state. So for starters, pay definitely plays a big role. Florida's ranked 50th in the country for their average teacher's salary, which is around $54,000. There's also the issue of supply and demand, and data shows there aren't as many new teachers coming out of college to fill this growing number of empty positions. But Florida's not alone in this. There's, the National Center for Education Statistics also reported that 86% of all K through 12 public schools have trouble hiring teachers in that 23 to 24 school year.
You mentioned pay. How do teacher salaries nationwide compare to the average American worker?
Yeah, and that's what I thought was interesting here. The average yearly salary for teachers was $68,000 in October of 2023. But when you adjust it for inflation, they're making 5% less than they did 10 years ago. So like the starting salaries for teachers are now more than $4,200 less than they were in the 2008 to 2009 school years, which is pretty crazy.
Right, it makes a big difference. All right, Emma, thank you. And for more on this Fact Check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. Developing now, a federal court has ruled the military can't keep HIV positive people out. Legal decisions have been chipping away at the Defense Department's stance on HIV for years. The newest ruling broadly bars the military from preventing anyone with HIV from enlisting. According to the Centers for Disease Control, undetectable people cannot transmit the virus. The Defense Department has argued providing medicine to keep those viral loads undetectable would cost the military too much. Antibiotics may be a viable option to treat appendicitis instead of having surgery. That's according to two separate studies of appendicitis published in JAMA and the New England Journal of Medicine. In both studies, researchers treated people with appendicitis with antibiotics. Only about 30% of the participants had an appendectomy after an antibiotic treatment across each study. One of the studies was with children. The other was with adults. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington, from the race to the White House to the Fed's latest reading on inflation.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. The Democratic National Convention is in the books, and national correspondent Christine Frizzau, you are in Chicago. You covered the convention all week. What are your top takeaways from this week's events?
Yeah, greetings from my hotel room here after what was a very long and busy week. A lot of takeaways here at the convention. Democrats worked really hard to sort of frame this very historic election as one that is passing the baton from the past to the future. Obviously, we had President Joe Biden kick off the convention on Monday night, talk about why he thinks Kamala Harris is good for this job. And one thing that really struck me is how many speakers said, we finally have hope again. And this was perhaps not meant to be a slight at Joe Biden, but this wasn't just about Donald Trump. This was about the lack of hope Democrats have been feeling for a long time now. So with this new candidate, this younger candidate, what some would say a bolder vision for the country, that's kind of what I heard from delegates over the week. They are hoping that this can propel them back into a chance to beat Donald Trump. The real big messaging was portraying Donald Trump as somebody who represented a dark and dangerous past. They say Kamala Harris represents the future. So this is really kind of what was hammered home. We learned a lot about her story, the personal story of her running mate, Tim Walz. We learned about them. The country got to know them a little better. As far as the policy proposals, though, those we're still a little light on those. And we expect in the next 74 days or so, hopefully we'll learn a little bit more about exactly, what she wants to do differently from President Joe Biden and what she would want to keep the same.
And there was a notable messaging effort to pivot Harris and the party toward the center, but national correspondent Matt Galka Donald Trump and the Republicans have been labeling her as dangerously liberal, and they're using her own words as evidence. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Steve, anybody who watched this past week could probably notice that attempt at the shift or the pivot towards the center. When Kamala Harris was giving her acceptance speech, she really leaned into the line for the people. She said she'd be a president for all people. Some of the speakers at the DNC this week were some former Trump officials, Republicans, also former Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger, to try and get those people in the middle, or disaffected Republicans, over toward the Democrat side. And when Harris did talk about policy, she talked about things like policing, like safety. She promised to secure the border and bring back a bill that was killed earlier this year, a border security bill. So when she touched on those policy standpoints, again, not as progressive of a pitch that we've heard maybe in the past decade or so. But as you mentioned, Republicans are trying to paint her as dangerously liberal. A release from the Trump-Vance campaign after Harris's acceptance speech talked about her pledges in the past to eliminate cash bail, pledges in the past to redirect resources from police, pledges in the past to support a Green New Deal, while also hitting her on the fact that she doesn't really have a policy page out there right now that is talking about her plan and her policies. So along with labeling her dangerously liberal, Donald Trump is also trying to float one of his nicknames to try and get it and to stick, calling her Comrade Kamala, as they do try to paint the picture to voters that she is too far left to be elected.
And national correspondent Atra Elnishar, the economy a big issue for Trump and for Harris. The Fed chairman spoke on Friday. Always draws a ton of interest for economy watchers. What did he say?
Yeah, every word Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell speaks, we dissect, we look for meaning in the tea leaves, but he was actually pretty blunt during a symposium address in Jackson Hole, Wyoming this week. He said the time has come for policy to adjust. And those 8 words, folks have been waiting 2.5 years to hear them. Folks who are strained by interest rates, who want to buy a home, who want to take out a loan, or a company that wants to make a big investment. Those interest rates by design have made it painful to do so. So Jerome Powell made it clear that he now has confidence that inflation is on a sustained path to their 2% rate target, that the concern now is going to shift to the labor market. Data shows that it is cooling off. Hiring is slowing, but layoffs have not spiked in any concerning way. So that's going to be the focus, because remember, Congress gives the Fed 2 mandates: price stabilization, they believe they are almost there, and maximum employment, which is now going to be a bigger priority than it was for officials like Powell.
Atra, Matt, Christine, thank you all for your hard work. Back to you.
There are new concerns that athletes playing on artificial turf could be absorbing dangerous forever chemicals through their skin. Spotlight on America correspondent Chris Daniels explains.
Even on an artificial field in San Diego,
I've been playing soccer since I was a small child.
Salar Parvini feels naturally at home with his young daughter, Emma.
Oh, she loves it.
Yet he admits to being alarmed at what may lie at the surface: PFAS, toxic forever chemicals that have been linked to cancer and developmental health risks.
I always equate it to making spaghetti. So you can't make spaghetti without flour, and you can't make artificial turf without PFAS. To extrude a blade of artificial turf, you need to have PFAS either in the mix or coated through the machine, or both.
He has drawn that conclusion after he and his daughter participated in a small preliminary study by PEER, or the Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. Researchers tested for the chemical through skin contact on real grass versus the fake stuff. Well, what did you uncover?
That 3 out of 4 of them picked up almost double the PFOS, which is one of the most dangerous and well-studied PFAS, on their hands after playing on artificial turf.
Kyla Bennett is a former EPA scientist and led the study that is different than previous probes into potential health concerns surrounding crumb rubber field infill in artificial fields.
A lot of people are turning away from crumb rubber now, and they're using different infills, but it turns out that it doesn't really matter because the blades themselves are coated with PFAS and causing this exposure.
4 states, Colorado, Maine, Rhode Island, and Vermont, have taken action to ban or restrict PFAS in turf. When asked about PFAS in artificial turf, the EPA pointed us to a long-term study of tire crumb rubber, finding that chemical exposure is likely limited, but that evaluation didn't include PFAS, and the agency says it has no plans to study PFAS in any part of artificial turf. Bennett argues the preliminary findings are proof the EPA needs to dig deeper.
It's not that they didn't find a risk, they didn't look at it yet.
How has this changed your love of soccer?
It doesn't change my love of soccer, but certainly I'm much more wary when she plays on artificial turf. When she plays on turf, we are always very quick to sort of wash our hands, wash our face.
Parvini's attempt to change California's state law to prohibit future artificial turf fields passed the state assembly in 2023 and was vetoed by Governor Gavin Newsom based on the logistics and enforcement challenges.
It's for the state of California and really the world to decide, is it safe for my children to play on it? Well, I mean, if PFAS is considered safe, great. If PFAS is not considered safe, then we have millions of acres of problems.
Without definitive answers, the issue will likely continue to get kicked around.
Nice.
In San Diego, I'm Chris Daniels for Spotlight on America.
Up next on the National Desk, fareflation. From parking to food to games, which start parts of the summer staple could cost you more this year. And drug death arrest neighbors in Maryland sound off as an elementary school teacher faces a long list of drug charges in their community. This is the National Desk, America's News. Now, we have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. From inflation impacting fair season in New York to a community chipping in what they can after a church was vandalized in Oklahoma. We're taking the pulse of America, but we start with a teacher facing a long list of drug charges in Maryland.
A Montgomery County first grade teacher is accused of distributing narcotics as police investigate the death of a man who overdosed on fentanyl.
That is gut-wrenching. You are the leader in their eyes, and to be a part of something like that is just beyond me. It's disgusting.
According to police, 34-year-old Sarah Magid had been in contact with the victim, who died in D.C. in March. Officers arrested her after police and DEA special agents searched her home yesterday. Now, the Dr. Charles R. Drew elementary teacher is facing a slew of drug charges.
I have chills just hearing it. It really does concern me. You're talking about babies. That first grade teacher, that's hard.
All of our costs, go up for our purchases. It's reflected in our shipping and the price of the candy because most of the stuff is name brand stuff. We have imported candies as well, and our starting numbers are a little higher this year for sure.
After participating for as long as 20 years, these vendors continue to show up for much bigger reasons.
The thing I look forward to most is seeing people. I see, we have a great following, and to see the same people come back year after year is great to see.
At the end of the day, if we don't have people out, we're not having fun, and we're certainly not making any money, so we try to make it affordable for everybody.
It's become something that people expect everywhere, that prices are going to be a little bit higher. We're trying to keep things affordable here. It's fun to see people having a good time when they come in and see their old-time favorites.
On August 5th, these fire extinguishers were emptied on pews, the pastor's office, and the carpet. Mirrors broken. items left scattered around the historic building dating to the 1920s and 30s.
And then as we come into the sanctuary,
the historic congregation has been around since 1893, according to Deacon Lee Matz.
The basement has been vandalized, the upstairs has been vandalized, the bathrooms have been vandalized, the church has been vandalized. Why would you do this to a church, let alone a business or a private home? But why would you do it to a church?
Questions like who did this and what the church's financial future looks like are top of mind for the community.
We're a staple within this community, and we're not going to give up.
Still ahead here, a growing percentage of the U.S. population is over 65. The unexpected factor scientists say could help you age gracefully. Ching, for the first time ever, a gold bar is worth $1 million. Prices for the precious metal hit a record high this week, soaring to more than $2,500 per troy ounce. The average gold bar weighs 400 troy ounces. Most gold bars are usually traded internationally by central banks and bullion dealers. They see the precious metal as a long-term, reliable store of value during economic turmoil. A new study suggests aging gracefully is easier to do if you have a special someone in your life, especially for men. The research published in the journal International Social Work linked successful aging to marriage among adults older than 60. According to the study, married men were up to 4 times more likely to achieve optimal physical, mental, and social well-being compared to single peers. That'll be all for us on this weekend edition of the National Desk, America's News. Now, don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thanks for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Dee Gatton, and from all of us here, have a great week.